Commander Zethkar stood on the bridge of his warship and watched the small vessel drift through space ahead of them. The ship looked weak and simple compared to the mighty vessels of the hegemony fleet. Its hull was made of basic metal alloys that his weapons could cut through like soft tissue. The energy readings showed primitive fusion reactors that barely produced enough power to keep the lights on. This would be easy. Unknown vessel, you have entered hegemony space without permission. Zethkar spoke into his communication device. His voice carried the authority of 17 conquered star systems. Surrender immediately or face destruction. The response came back in a strange language that his computers quickly translated. The voice belonged to someone called Captain Jake Morrison. Greetings, Hegemony Fleet. We are the UES Explorer, a peaceful research vessel from Earth. We request diplomatic contact and offer our friendship to your people. Zethkar's scaled lips pulled back in what his species considered a smile. Friendship. These creatures thought they could offer friendship to the mighty hegemony. They were just another weak species that would soon learn their place in the galaxy. He had seen this pattern many times before. First came the polite words, then the begging, then the surrender. It was always the same. There will be no diplomacy, Zethkar replied. You will shut down your engines and prepare to be boarded. Resistance will result in your immediate destruction. The human captain's voice came back calm and steady. I'm afraid we cannot comply with that request, Commander. We have important scientific data that must reach Earth. Perhaps we can discuss an alternative arrangement. Zethkar felt his patience wearing thin. These humans were more stubborn than most species he encountered. Usually a simple threat was enough to make primitive races surrender. He would need to demonstrate the power of the hegemony. Target their engine section, he ordered his weapons officer. Disable their propulsion but leave life support intact. I want them alive for questioning. The hegemony ship's plasma cannons fired a precise burst that struck the Explorer's rear section. Explosions bloomed across the human vessel's hull, and Zethkar expected to see the familiar signs of a ship dying in space. Instead, something unexpected happened. The human ship did not stop moving. Internal explosions continued to flash through its corridors, but the vessel maintained its course and speed. Zethkar's sensors showed that the engines were badly damaged, yet somehow the ship kept flying. How are they still moving? Zethkar demanded from his tactical officer. Unknown, Commander. Their main engines are offline, but they appear to be using secondary systems. Our scans show humans moving through damaged sections, performing repairs while fires burn around them. Zethkar watched his display screens with growing confusion. The Explorer's crew was not behaving like any species he had encountered before. Instead of panicking or surrendering, they were working. Human figures moved through smoke-filled corridors carrying tools and equipment. They were fixing their ship while it was under attack. Chief Engineer Lisa Rodriguez crawled through a maintenance shaft that was filled with toxic smoke and sparking electrical systems. Her environmental suit was torn, and her helmet display showed dangerous radiation levels, but she continued working. She reached the power distribution center and began rerouting energy from the ship's scientific equipment to the damaged engines. Meanwhile, Communications Officer Ben Parker was doing something that made Zethkar's blood run cold. Instead of sending distress signals or surrender messages, Parker was broadcasting detailed technical scans of the hegemony ship on open frequencies. He was telling anyone who might be listening exactly where the hegemony vessel's weapons were located, how thick its armor was, and where its weak points could be found. They are broadcasting our ship specifications across the galaxy, Zethkar's communication officer reported with obvious fear in his voice. Dr. Alex Turner was working in the Explorer's science lab, which was now exposed to space through a gaping hole in the hull. He wore a full pressure suit and worked by the light of emergency lamps. Turner was a particle physicist, but now he was building weapons. He disconnected the ship's dark matter containment system and began modifying it into something that could be used in combat. Captain Morrison's voice came over the communication channel again. Commander Zethkar, I assume that is your name based on the command frequencies we have detected. You have damaged our ship and endangered my crew. This is an act of war against the human species. War? Zethkar laughed. You have one small ship with primitive weapons, The hegemony has thousands of vessels and has conquered entire civilizations. What war could you possibly fight? The kind of war you will regret starting, Morrison replied. The explorer suddenly changed course, turning toward the hegemony ship instead of away from it. This was completely against military logic. Damaged ships should retreat, not attack. Yet the human vessel was moving closer, its makeshift weapons charging with energy. Lisa Rodriguez had managed to restore partial power to the ship's engines by burning out half the life support systems. The crew was now surviving on emergency oxygen, but they had propulsion. Ben Parker had finished broadcasting the hegemony ship's technical specifications and was now jamming their communication systems, preventing them from calling for reinforcements. Dr. Turner completed his improvised weapon and reported to Captain Morrison. The dark matter projector is ready, Captain. It will only work at close range, but it should penetrate their shields. Close range it is, Doctor, Morrison replied. The explorer accelerated toward the hegemony vessel, its crew working in damaged sections without proper life support, breathing bottled air and working by emergency lighting. They had turned their scientific research ship into a warship in less than 20 minutes. Zethkar realized with growing horror that these humans were not behaving like prey animals. They were behaving like predators. When attacked, they did not flee or surrender. They fought back with every resource available to them. They used their intelligence and their tools and their courage to strike at their enemies. Evasive maneuvers, Zethkar ordered, but it was too late. The explorer fired its improvised dark matter weapon at point-blank range. The beam punched through the hegemony ship's shields like they were not there and tore a massive hole in the hull. Atmosphere rushed out into space, carrying equipment and crew members with it. As the hegemony ship's systems failed around him, Zethkar understood that he had made a terrible mistake. These humans were not another weak species to be easily conquered. They were something far more dangerous. They were survivors who would turn anything into a weapon and fight until their last breath. The explorer pulled away from the damaged hegemony vessel, its crew already working to repair their own ship for whatever came next. Captain Morrison's final message was simple and terrifying. Tell your leaders that Earth remembers its enemies. Zethkar's damaged ship limped through space for 3 days while his crew made emergency repairs. Half his vessel's systems were offline, and he had lost 12 crew members when the humans punched that impossible hole through his hull. The repairs were going slowly because his engineers could not understand how such a primitive weapon had penetrated their advanced shields. On the 3rd day, his tactical officer made a report that sent ice through Zethkar's veins. Commander, I am detecting 17 human vessels approaching our position at maximum acceleration. They are ignoring all fuel efficiency protocols and burning their engines at dangerous levels. Zethkar studied the sensor readings with growing dread. The approaching ships were not military vessels like his own. The largest was barely half the size of his warship. Several appeared to be cargo haulers that had been hastily modified with weapons. One was clearly a mining platform that should never leave orbit around a planet. Yet they were all flying toward him at speeds that should burn out their engines. Admiral Kate Sullivan commanded the rescue fleet from the bridge of the UES Defiance. She had received Captain Morrison's quantum burst transmission along with the detailed scans of hegemony technology that Ben Parker had broadcast. Within 6 hours, every human ship within 50 light years had changed course toward the explorer's last known position. The human vessels had been traveling for 3 days, without rest, their crews surviving on stimulants and determination. They had pushed their ships beyond safe operating limits, accepting engine damage and structural stress because their fellow humans needed help. This was not the behavior of a civilized military force. This was the behavior of a pack hunting together. All ships, this is Admiral Sullivan, she broadcast to her fleet. The explorer is transmitting a weak beacon. They are alive, but badly damaged. The enemy vessel is also damaged, but still armed. We go in fast and hard, just like we practiced. Captain Morrison had not been idle during the 3 days since the first battle. The explorer's crew had been feeding tactical data to the approaching rescue fleet, analyzing hegemony weapon patterns and shield frequencies. When the human ships arrived, they would know exactly how to fight. Pilot Danny Cross flew his fighter through the asteroid field that surrounded the battle site, using gravitational forces to accelerate his small craft beyond its design specifications. His instruments showed red warnings about engine stress and structural failure, but Cross ignored them. His job was to mark targets for the larger ships, and he would do that job even if it killed him. Gunner Michelle Blake sat at the weapons console of a converted cargo hauler, manually calculating firing solutions for weapons that had been installed, just days before. The ship's computer was not designed for combat, so Blake was doing the math in her head, estimating range and velocity and target movement. She had been doing these calculations for 14 hours straight without sleep. The human attack began without warning or communication. The 17 ships spread out in a formation that made no sense to Zethkar's tactical understanding. Some ships moved toward his vessel while others flew away from it. Some accelerated while others decelerated. There was no coordinated pattern that he could recognize or counter. Commander Rodriguez, now aboard Admiral Sullivan's flagship, had modified their sensors to track hegemony jump signatures. She knew that the enemy ship was preparing to retreat, and she was ready to follow them wherever they went. The humans had learned to hunt across interstellar distances. The battle was unlike anything Zethkar had experienced in his military career. The human ships did not fight like an organized fleet. They fought like individual predators working together toward a common goal. Each ship attacked differently, using weapons and tactics that the hegemony had never encountered. Danny Cross brought his fighter screaming out of the asteroid field at impossible speed, firing small missiles that had been designed for mining operations. The missiles were not military weapons, but they exploded with enough force to damage the hegemony ship's sensor arrays. Cross's fighter took heavy damage from return fire, but he had completed his mission. Michelle Blake's cargo hauler fired its improvised weapons from a distance that should have made accurate shooting impossible. But Blake had calculated the exact trajectory needed, accounting for gravitational effects and target movement. Her shots struck the hegemony ship's shield generators with surgical precision. The human ships moved in ways that defied military logic. When Zethkar concentrated his fire on one vessel, 2 others would attack from different angles. When he tried to target the command ship, smaller vessels would block his shots with their own hulls. The humans were sacrificing themselves to protect each other. A converted mining platform moved close to Zethkar's ship and began using its industrial cutting lasers as weapons. The lasers were designed to slice through asteroid rock, and they carved deep wounds in the hegemony vessel's armor. The mining platform took heavy fire and began to break apart, but its crew kept fighting until their ship finally exploded. Admiral Sullivan watched the battle from her command chair, coordinating her ships through voice commands and hand signals. She had no complex battle computers or tactical displays like the hegemony commander. She was fighting by instinct and experience, reading the flow of combat like a predator reading the movements of prey. "All ships, the enemy is preparing to jump," Commander Rodriguez reported. "I am tracking their signature. They cannot escape." Zethkar gave the order to retreat, hoping to escape before more of his crew died. But as his ship began to enter hyperspace, he realized that the humans were following him. Their sensors had locked onto his ship's energy signature, and they would pursue him across the galaxy if necessary. The hegemony vessel emerged from hyperspace near a supply depot 3 star systems away. Zethkar hoped to find reinforcements and repairs, but the human ships appeared just minutes later. They had followed him through hyperspace, something that should have been impossible with their primitive technology. The human fleet attacked the supply depot without hesitation, destroying fuel tanks and ammunition stockpiles. They were not just fighting Zethkar's ship. They were attacking hegemony infrastructure, cutting off his supply lines and preventing his escape. Captain Morrison's voice came over the communication channels as the explorer limped into the battle zone. His ship was still badly damaged, but his crew was still fighting. "Commander Zethkar, you wanted to see how humans fight. Now you know. We do not fight alone and we do not give up." The battle for the supply depot lasted 6 hours. When it ended, the depot was destroyed, and Zethkar had lost 2 more ships from his small fleet. The humans had suffered heavy casualties, as well, but they continued to pursue him with relentless determination. As his remaining ships fled deeper into hegemony space, Zethkar began to understand what made these creatures so dangerous. They did not fight like civilized beings who followed rules of war and military protocol. They fought like pack predators who would hunt their enemies to the ends of the galaxy. The humans had turned space itself into their hunting ground. They could track ships across interstellar distances, coordinate attacks without central command, and fight with weapons that should not work in the vacuum of space. They were intelligent enough to build starships, but savage enough to ram those ships into enemy vessels if necessary. Zethkar sent an urgent message to Hegemony High Command, warning them about the human threat. But he doubted that his superiors would understand until they faced these creatures themselves. The humans were not just another primitive species to be conquered. They were apex predators who had learned to hunt among the stars. Behind him, the human ships continued their pursuit, their crews pushing damaged vessels beyond safe limits because they would not abandon their mission. They were coming for him, and Zethkar knew that nowhere in the galaxy would be safe from their reach. The Supreme Council of the Hegemony gathered in their great chamber on the homeworld to hear Zethkar's report. The massive hall was filled with representatives from dozens of conquered species, all serving their reptilian masters with proper fear and respect. Zethkar stood before the council with his uniform bearing the scars of battle, telling them about the human threat. "Impossible," declared Supreme Admiral Thisara, her scales gleaming with authority. "One primitive species cannot threaten the might of the hegemony. You encountered an unusually aggressive specimen, nothing more. These humans will learn to submit like all the others." Zethkar tried to explain what he had witnessed, but the council dismissed his warnings. They had conquered 17 star systems through superior technology and overwhelming force. No single species had ever successfully resisted them for more than a few months. The humans would be no different. "I will personally lead a proper military response," Thisara announced. 50 ships of the line will be sufficient to crush this human infestation. We will capture their homeworld and add them to our collection of servant species." While the hegemony debated and planned, the humans had not been idle. Earth's entire industrial capacity had been converted to military production in just 6 months. Dr. Alex Turner worked with Earth's top military scientists in underground laboratories, analyzing every piece of hegemony technology they had captured. Commander Rick Stevens coordinated the planet's defenses from a command center built deep beneath the Pacific Ocean. Dr. Carol Wright led teams of engineers who were rebuilding human ships with new weapons and armor based on alien technology. They had learned from their first encounters with the hegemony, and they were preparing surprises. The asteroid belt between Mars and Jupiter had been transformed into the largest weapons platform in human history. Every mining station was now a missile battery capable of launching nuclear warheads at relativistic speeds. Robotic factories worked around the clock, building ammunition and spare parts for the coming battle. Earth's orbital habitats had been converted into fortress cities, their civilian populations evacuated to underground shelters on the planet's surface. The space stations bristled with weapons and armor, ready to fight to the last person if the enemy reached Earth itself. When Thisara's fleet arrived at the edge of the solar system, they found a transformed battlefield. The humans had turned their entire star system into a weapon. Early warning sensors detected the hegemony ships while they were still light hours away, giving Earth's defenders time to prepare. All ships, battle stations, Admiral Sullivan commanded from her flagship in the asteroid belt. She now commanded a fleet of 300 vessels, most of them built or modified specifically for this battle. The ships looked crude compared to hegemony technology, but they carried weapons that the aliens had never encountered. Captain Tony Mitchell led a squadron of ships that appeared to be poorly armored and vulnerable to attack. But Mitchell's ships had been designed with deliberate weak points in their hulls. When hegemony weapons breached those weak spots, the explosive decompression would launch clouds of metal fragments that could shred enemy fighters at close range. Lieutenant Amy Foster commanded a boarding party aboard a ship that looked like a simple transport vessel. But Foster's team carried experimental weapons and computer viruses designed to turn hegemony technology against itself. They were not planning to destroy enemy ships. They were planning to capture them. The battle began when Thisara's fleet entered the asteroid belt. The hegemony ships moved in perfect formation, their shields raised and weapons charged. They expected to sweep aside the primitive human defenses and proceed to Earth for a quick conquest. Instead, they flew into the largest ambush in galactic history. Thousands of missiles launched from hidden positions throughout the asteroid belt, each one guided by human pilots who were willing to die to protect their world. The missiles moved at incredible speeds, too fast for hegemony point defense systems to stop them all. Dr. Turner's greatest creation was revealed when the first hegemony ship fell to human fire. The humans had reverse-engineered alien shield technology and improved it. Their new shields could absorb energy from enemy weapons and redirect it back at the attackers. The hegemony found themselves being destroyed by their own weapons. Captain Mitchell's squadron engaged hegemony fighters in close combat, deliberately allowing their ships to be damaged. When enemy fire breached their hulls, the escaping atmosphere carried metal fragments that tore through alien fighters like bullets through paper. The hegemony pilots had never faced an enemy that used their own damage as a weapon. Lieutenant Foster's boarding party successfully captured a hegemony cruiser by pretending to be refugees seeking surrender. Once aboard the enemy ship, they released computer viruses that took control of the vessel's systems. The captured ship turned its weapons on its own fleet, spreading chaos and confusion among the hegemony forces. Thisara watched in growing horror as her superior technology was turned against her. The humans had not just copied hegemony weapons, they had improved them, modified them, and found ways to use them that their original designers never intended. Every advantage the hegemony possessed was being neutralized by human ingenuity. The humans fought with weapons that should not work, and tactics that violated every rule of civilized warfare. They used gravity wells to accelerate missiles beyond safe speeds. They detonated nuclear warheads inside their own ships to damage nearby enemies. They sacrificed entire squadrons to create tactical advantages for other units. Dr. Carroll writes, engineering teams had built ships that could separate into multiple smaller vessels during combat, confusing enemy targeting systems. Commander Stevens coordinated attacks from across the solar system, using quantum communication links to synchronize strikes that arrived simultaneously from different directions. The hegemony fleet found itself fighting an enemy that seemed to anticipate their every move. The humans had studied captured hegemony tactics and developed counters for every standard military procedure. When Thisara ordered her ships to form defensive formations, human forces attacked from angles that those formations could not protect. The battle raged for 18 hours, spreading across the entire solar system. Human ships fought in the rings of Saturn, using ice particles as cover. Others engaged the enemy near Jupiter, using the planet's massive gravity well to accelerate their attacks. The humans had turned their entire star system into a battlefield that favored their tactics. When the fighting finally ended, Thisara had lost 31 ships and was retreating with the survivors toward hegemony space. But the humans were not content to simply defend their territory. Admiral Sullivan's fleet pursued the retreating aliens, determined to carry the war to the enemy. Captain Morrison, now fully recovered from his earlier injuries, led the pursuit in a new ship built specifically for deep space operations. His crew included many veterans of the first battle, including Chief Engineer Rodriguez and Communications Officer Parker. They had learned to fight the hegemony, and now they would teach that knowledge to the galaxy. As the human fleet left the solar system in pursuit of their enemies, Earth began producing new ships and weapons at an unprecedented rate. The humans had discovered that they possessed a talent for war that rivaled their genius for science and engineering. They would use that talent to ensure that no species would ever again face the threat of hegemony conquest. Thisara sent desperate messages to the Supreme Council, warning them that the humans were far more dangerous than anyone had imagined. But her warnings came too late. The humans were already spreading across the galaxy, carrying their message of resistance to every world that suffered under hegemony rule. The Hegemony Supreme Council made their greatest mistake when they assumed the humans would be satisfied with defending their homeworld. Instead of celebrating their victory and returning to Earth, the human fleets had spread across hegemony, space like a plague, attacking targets that made no military sense. General Sam Nelson commanded Operation Payback from a mobile command center that moved constantly through hyperspace to avoid detection. Admiral Patricia Young led the main battle fleets while smaller human task forces struck at hegemony infrastructure across dozens of star systems. The humans were not fighting a conventional war. They were fighting to destroy the hegemony's ability to wage war at all. Commander Kyle Hayes commanded one of these small strike forces from his stealth ship UES Shadow. Hayes had been a mining engineer before the war, but now he led hit-and-run attacks against hegemony supply lines. His team specialized in appearing without warning, destroying their targets and vanishing before enemy reinforcements could arrive. The hegemony mining station at Kepler 442 was processing rare metals needed for their advanced weapons when Hayes and his team struck. The humans did not attack the station directly. Instead, they sabotaged the automated mining equipment, causing it to extract dangerous radioactive materials that contaminated the entire facility. The station had to be abandoned, and its production was lost for months. Dr. Monica Reed had joined the war effort as Earth's leading expert on alien psychology. She studied captured hegemony communications and developed propaganda broadcasts. Designed to turn their subject species against their overlords, Reed's messages were transmitted on frequencies that the hegemony could not block, carrying news of human victories to enslaved populations across the galaxy. The humans did not simply destroy hegemony assets. They stole technology, rescued enslaved workers, and left behind quantum viruses that corrupted enemy databases. Hayes and his teams had become experts at fighting a war that existed in the shadows, striking at targets that the hegemony never thought to defend. Commander Hayes led a raid on a hegemony communication relay that coordinated fleet movements across 3 star systems. Instead of destroying the relay with explosives, his team reprogrammed it to send false orders to hegemony ships. Enemy fleets began flying to empty systems while their real targets went undefended. The confusion lasted for weeks before the hegemony discovered what had happened. The psychological warfare campaign led by Dr. Reed was having effects that went far beyond military strategy. Subject species that had served the hegemony for decades began to question their masters. Rebellions broke out on 17 worlds as enslaved populations learned that the mighty hegemony could be defeated. The humans were not just fighting a war. They were inspiring a galactic revolution. Lieutenant Colonel Janet Foster led a rescue mission to the prison world of Tartarus 7, where the hegemony kept political prisoners and captured enemy soldiers. Foster's team infiltrated the planet, using stolen hegemony ships and false identification codes. They freed over 3,000 prisoners, including leaders of resistance movements from a dozen different species. The freed prisoners carried human weapons and communication equipment back to their homeworlds, spreading the knowledge of how to fight the hegemony. Soon, human military advisors were working with resistance groups across the galaxy, teaching them tactics and providing them with captured alien technology. Zethkar found himself promoted to Supreme Military Commander, as the hegemony government panicked in the face of spreading rebellion. Every strategy he developed to counter the human attacks was met with something unprecedented. When he fortified key systems, the humans attacked undefended supply bases. When he spread his forces thin to protect everything, human battle fleets concentrated overwhelming force on single targets. The humans fought as if they took the hegemony's existence as a personal insult. They did not simply want to win the war. They wanted to ensure that the hegemony could never threaten anyone again. This was not conquest. This was extermination of an idea. Commander Hayes led his most daring raid when he infiltrated the hegemony's primary shipyard at Proxima Centauri. His team did not try to destroy the facility. Instead, they reprogrammed the automated construction systems to build ships with hidden weaknesses. The hegemony would discover too late that their newest vessels would fail in combat at the worst possible moments. The humans had learned to fight a war that existed on multiple levels simultaneously. While their fleets engaged hegemony forces in open battle, their special operations teams struck at infrastructure and communications. Their propaganda broadcasts undermined enemy morale, while their computer viruses corrupted critical databases. Ambassador Paul Garcia worked with freed prisoners and rebel leaders to coordinate resistance movements across the galaxy. Garcia had been a diplomat before the war, But now he was building military alliances with species that had never worked together before. The humans were creating a coalition that shared their hatred of tyranny. Dr. Reed's psychological analysis of hegemony, leadership revealed a crucial weakness. The reptilian species had built their empire on the assumption that they were naturally superior to all other life forms. When faced with defeat by creatures they considered primitive, many hegemony commanders simply could not accept reality. They made increasingly desperate decisions that played into human strategic plans. Zethkar realized that he was no longer fighting a military campaign. He was fighting for the survival of his civilization. The humans had turned every strength of the hegemony into a weakness. Their advanced technology was vulnerable to computer viruses. Their centralized command structure was easily disrupted by communication attacks. Their subject species were becoming enemies. The final phase of Operation Payback began when General Nelson launched simultaneous attacks on 50 hegemony worlds. Each attack was carefully planned to maximize psychological impact while minimizing human casualties. The humans were not trying to conquer territory. They were trying to prove that the hegemony could not protect its own citizens. Commander Hayes led the attack on the hegemony's primary military academy, where their officer candidates were trained. His team did not harm the students. Instead, they broadcast recordings of human military victories directly into the academy's computer systems. The future leaders of the hegemony watched their supposedly invincible fleets being destroyed by primitive humans. The message was clear and terrifying. If the humans could strike at the heart of hegemony space without warning, nowhere was safe. The empire that had dominated the galaxy for centuries was crumbling under the assault of a single species that refused to accept defeat. As rebellion spread, and hegemony forces retreated from dozens of systems, Zethkar prepared for a final, desperate gamble. He would gather every remaining ship and make a last stand at the hegemony capital world. But even as he planned this final battle, he knew that the humans had already won. They had not just defeated the hegemony military. They had destroyed the idea that any species had the right to rule over others through force alone. Zethkar stood on the bridge of his flagship as it orbited the hegemony capital world, watching the largest fleet in his species' history prepare for battle. He had stripped defenses from every conquered system, recalled every ship, and gathered every weapon the hegemony possessed. Nearly 2,000 vessels surrounded the homeworld, ready to make their final stand against the human invasion. The irony was not lost on him. The mighty hegemony, which had conquered 17 star systems, was now hiding behind their own planet like a cornered animal. But Zethkar had learned to respect human military capabilities. If this was to be the final battle, he would meet it with everything his civilization could muster. Long-range sensors detect the human fleet approaching, his tactical officer reported. Estimated arrival in 6 hours. Zethkar nodded grimly. He had expected this moment since the humans first began their campaign of systematic destruction. They had spent 2 years dismantling the hegemony piece by piece, freeing enslaved populations and turning subject species into allies. Now they were coming to finish what they had started. When the human fleet finally appeared on his sensors, Zethkar felt his heart sink with despair. The approaching armada was enormous, easily matching his own forces in numbers. But what broke his spirit was not the size of the fleet. It was the composition. Alongside the familiar human vessels flew ships from dozens of species that the hegemony had once enslaved. Avian fighters from the Talon Nebula flew beside human interceptors. Crystalline battleships from the Vega system moved in formation with Earth's newest dreadnoughts. The humans had not just defeated the hegemony militarily. They had united its former victims into a coalition of liberation. Admiral Morrison, now commanding the largest human fleet ever assembled, broadcast a message to the hegemony forces. His voice carried across space with calm authority. Commander Zethkar, this is Admiral Morrison of the Galactic Liberation Fleet. You are surrounded and outnumbered. Surrender now, and your people will be treated with mercy. Zethkar almost laughed at the irony. The humans were offering him the same choice he had once offered them. But unlike his own species, they were actually offering genuine mercy rather than slavery. He had studied human military doctrine during the Long War, and he knew they kept their promises. The final battle began when a group of young hegemony officers, refusing to accept defeat, opened fire on the approaching fleet. The humans responded, with overwhelming force, but their attacks were precise and calculated. They targeted weapon systems and engines rather than life support, trying to disable enemy ships rather than destroy them. Captain Morrison led a boarding party onto Zethkar's flagship, moving through corridors filled with smoke and sparking electronics. But instead of the brutal assault Zethkar expected, the humans moved carefully, providing medical aid to wounded hegemony soldiers and treating prisoners with respect that the reptilian species had never shown their own captives. The battle was swift and decisive. Hegemony ships surrendered by the dozens as their crews realized that continued resistance would only lead to more death. The humans had learned to fight with such efficiency that most enemy vessels were disabled before they could fire more than a few shots. When Morrison reached the bridge of the hegemony flagship, Zethkar expected to be executed or enslaved like the leaders of so many conquered species. Instead, the human admiral offered him something that seemed impossible. "Commander Zethkar, I am authorized by the Galactic Alliance to offer you amnesty in exchange for your cooperation in rebuilding this region of space." Zethkar stared at the human admiral in confusion. "You would trust your enemies to help you, govern?" Morrison smiled with what seemed like genuine warmth. "Commander, we learned something important during this war. The galaxy is large enough for all of us if we work together instead of trying to dominate each other. Your military expertise could be valuable in protecting worlds that can no longer protect themselves." The transition from war to peace happened faster than anyone had expected. Within months, the former hegemony capital had become the headquarters of the Galactic Alliance, a federation of free worlds dedicated to mutual defense and cooperation. Zethkar found himself working alongside former enemies, helping to design defensive strategies for worlds that had once been hegemony slaves. Colonel Janet Foster, now serving as military liaison to former hegemony officers, worked with Zethkar to establish new training programs for Alliance forces. Ambassador Paul Garcia negotiated treaties between species that had been enemies for centuries, building diplomatic relationships based on mutual respect rather than fear. Dr. Monica Reed continued her psychological research, but now she focused on healing the trauma inflicted by decades of hegemony rule. Her work helped former slaves rebuild their societies while teaching former oppressors to live as equals among the species they had once dominated. Commander Hayes, the former engineer turned special operations expert, led joint missions with hegemony veterans to hunt down the few remaining loyalist forces that refused to accept the new order. These operations taught both humans and aliens to work together as partners rather than enemies. The humans had accomplished something that no other species in galactic history had achieved. They had not just won a war, they had transformed their enemies into allies and built a civilization based on cooperation rather than conquest. The former subjects of the hegemony now stood as equals in a federation that protected the weak instead of exploiting them. Zethkar served as military advisor to the Galactic Alliance for 10 years before retiring to write his memoirs. His final journal entry became required reading at military academies across the galaxy. "I thought we were apex predators because we conquered worlds through superior technology and overwhelming force. But humans are apex predators because they create families out of enemies. They do not just defeat their opponents. They transform them into friends. We never stood a chance against the humans, not because they were stronger than us, but because they were kinder. Their compassion was more devastating than their weapons, their mercy more destructive than their bombs. They destroyed our empire not by killing us, but by teaching us to be better than what we were. I have seen the future of this galaxy, and it belongs to those who build rather than destroy, who unite rather than divide, who offer friendship to their enemies instead of enslavement." The humans showed us that the greatest victory is not conquest, but the transformation of hatred into love. They made us realize that true strength comes not from the ability to destroy, but from the wisdom to create something better from the ashes of destruction. The hegemony fell not because we were weak, but because we never learned what the humans understood instinctively: The universe belongs to those who fight not for dominance, but for the dream that all beings can live together in peace. The galaxy had learned the most important lesson in its history. The most dangerous force in the universe was not superior technology or overwhelming firepower. It was the simple human belief that tomorrow could be better than today, and the willingness to fight to make that belief reality.